Hello, Doctor.
Hello, how are you?
Hey, sir.
Hmm?
How are you?
I'm well. Busy.
Good. Now,
Too
Doctor,
much propaganda today.
I brought a doctor to talk on to talk about COVID, but not a doctor of medical doctor. Brought a doctor of propaganda on to talk about COVID. Now, usually, I think you've been on the podcast a couple of times before, haven't you? Haven't you, Piers? And we've talked about Russiagate, and we've talked about, I think, Duma, but we
Yeah.
haven't talked about the COVID situation.
Yeah.
And it's something that I know that you're heavily researching. And I just wanted to bring you on and just talk to you about the madness that's going on at the moment. What do you think about it?
Well, to cut a long story short, I mean, we're now 2 years into the COVID event. And as I've said before in other interviews with other people, I think that the evidence that there was propaganda surrounding the COVID itself is well established now. And what I mean by that is the kind of propaganda which you could see in terms of exaggeration of threat levels, the use of behavioral psychologists as documented by Laura Dodsworth in State of Fear, the suppression of many, many scientists who are questioning lockdown and who are now questioning mandates related to the injection. That's pretty well documented now. There's not any doubt. I think that there's been a lot of propaganda being used in relation to that. And the most generous reading, not that I'm in a particularly generous mood at the moment, but for the purposes of interview, I'll remain generous. The most generous reading of that is that, you have panicked governments overreacting and scientists, some advising the government overreacting. And seeing how do we get people to comply with all of these policies. We need to increase the sense of fear, which I think is one of the Spy B documents referred to that. You had the panic papers in Germany doing effectively the same thing. And so the idea that you had propaganda to try to gain compliance with what were understood as the necessary policies, no doubt that they've been engaging in that. And it's certainly been accompanied by attempts to suppress and to, as it were, eliminate scientists, very credible scientists who are questioning things from the start. Where we are now is not just a question of looking at the propaganda in terms of, a careful, a bending over backwards reading that they're just trying to do good. Where we are now, I think, is that clearly COVID-19, there's enough evidence now to show that it's an event which is being used very deliberately in order to restructure our societies politically and economically. And on the economic strand, you've seen this emerging debate coming from economists such as Professor Werner, economics experts such as Catherine Austin-Fitts, also Fabio Vighi, the British professor at Cardiff, talking about the way in which COVID lockdowns have been used to try to suppress the economy whilst they simultaneously attempt to resolve the crisis in the finance markets, the crisis which came bounding back after 2008. And what you appear to have on the economic side is a drive ultimately to try to use vaccination or in mass injection and all of the sort of propaganda surrounding that to move towards a system of digital ID. And ultimately, and if you listen to what the central banks are saying, the goal is a central bank digital currency. And where people who've been warning about this, people such as Corinne Morningstar and Whitney Webb for a long time now, is that takes us straight into the trap, as it were, of potentially a social credit style system, where people's, what they spend their money on, how they spend it, what people say on social media are all monitored and subject to control, and you're subject to punishment as well, potentially, and just the warning signs that people point towards China. And so you have that element of this profound restructuring and, driven by this crisis in the finance markets being interpreted in different ways. I mean, some Marxists are interpreting it as a kind of crisis of capitalism, and there's sort of other sort of accounts of what's going on. But that clearly is what is going on. That's the drive, is to get this into this kind of digitalized society, which ultimately involves a huge concentration of power. And principally, an end of democracy is not an inaccurate way of describing it. And whilst you've had this is becoming very well established now, and people can go and read books by people like Ian Davis or Kees van der Pijl, or even look at Robert Kennedy Jr.'s new book, which looks at principally the regulatory capture of the FDA in America by the pharmaceutical industry. You have all of that evidence emerging. You have, as has been pointed out from the beginning by many, the World Economic Forum representing this essentially a political ideological drive. And this is these notions of build back better, this notion of the digitalized society, the notion of you own nothing but you're happy. All of those things appear to be the kind of sort of ideological political dressing for a radically altered political and economic structures for our societies, and ones which, as we've seen empirically, we've seen a huge upward transfer in wealth. And at the same time, going back to the Chinese social credit example, you have what can only be described as a profound concentration of power and wealth, and ultimately leading to control over populations. So people use terms such as neo-feudalism. So all of those, that's an awful lot of information to assimilate, as it were, but all of those things are now increasingly well documented, and I think it's unavoidable now to understand COVID-19 as Peter Dale Scott would describe it, as a deep event, an event which is being used in order to usher in incredibly profound and very undemocratic changes to our society. And that's where we are at. Very scary, very alarming. And as we can see with the protests which we've had this weekend over Europe, a lot of people resisting this now and opposing in for various reasons what's going on. And so underpinning that or reinforcing that, a very large number of organizations now globally which I've formed or which have started to address this issue, which are trying to push back against this agenda. You've got Panda in South Africa, you've got Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s Children's Health Defense. All of these organizations, I think, are increasingly aware that it's not just a scientific blunder we're looking at here or an overreaction. There's a political project underlying it, and that it's essential to try to find ways of now mobilizing against that. So propaganda on two levels. One, in terms of implementing policy specific to COVID-19, but now, I think the most accurate understanding and the biggest issue we have is the fact that this virus is being used in order to do an awful lot of heavy lifting in terms of political and economic restructuring. And as I made this sort of a comparison right at the start of the COVID event in the article for Off Guardian. In the same way that 9/11, as we know now, was used in order to initiate a whole series of regime change wars, which we still have and which are still going on in some ways. You had the exploitation of 9/11 as a deep event, and that's even before you get to the controversy surrounding 9/11 itself, a use of that event in order to start wars. And now with COVID-19, a use of the virus in order to profoundly change the world that we live in. So I think that's, from a propaganda analysis, and I'll stop now, is roughly where we are at.
There's a hell of a lot to unpack there in the first 10 minutes of this. Let's talk about the suppression, first of all, Doc, because when this first happened, in March, April of last year, when this first outbreak and the lockdowns first started, we had a massive suppression of people's voices. Anybody who was saying anything that was opposing or not, didn't fit the prevailing narrative. They were getting censured. They were having their social media accounts taken away. They were getting strikes. They were basically suppressing any negative talk of what was happening around the virus and vaccinations, or anything that was, like I say, opposing the narrative. And many of those things that people were being banned and losing their accounts for, we found out a year, 18 months later, that no, everything that they said were right. And, you know, for instance, if you started, I mean, I was still using YouTube at that time. I don't use it that much, but if I was to just say what you just said, Doc, that, you know, they were going to usher in this new era, this of the World Economic Forum, and they were going to be lockdown, and it won't stop with 2 vaccines. There'll be boosters then. I would lose my accounts for spreading misinformation. Yet every single thing that I've just said has not only come true, but it looks like it was all designed to let that happen. And that's extremely worrying, isn't it?
Yeah, it's extremely worrying, and I think for me the censorship was one of the early indicators that something was very wrong with what was happening. And I think it was, I'll apologize now if I'm quoting him wrong, but I think it's what he said. But Neil Clark, the British commentator, said that one of the things which alerted him early on, and it alerted me as well, that the people, elements that we were very familiar with, smearing and suppressing dissent over, for example, Syria, or even 9/11, were the same characters who were playing the same game with COVID-19. And so this was an indication that there's an organized approach here to trying to stop people from speaking out. And it is, I mean, it's incontrovertible. We know that that's what was happening. It was even being done, you know, in a sense, above board. You know, Ofcom was issuing guidelines to broadcasters. Facebook and YouTube were happily signing up to the idea that we've got to stay within the guidelines of the World Health Organization. And you're absolutely right. Anyone who's dissenting from that was hit hard. And of course, I was hit by the Times newspaper early on for COVID conspiracism. And when you look back now at what I was accused of, I think I would refer to question marks over the lethality of COVID, how serious it was, and this idea that this is, you know, similar to a bad flu season. The issue about the origin of the virus, you know, the bioweapon issue, or whatever formulation of that, was raised, and this was, you know, labeled as a conspiracy theorist. I think Vanessa was roped into that Times smear by Dominic Kennedy, who'd attacked us over Syria as well. She was accused of spreading conspiracies about Bill Gates. And as we know full well, Bill Gates, a major contributor to the World Health Organization, and somebody who has been pushing injection of entire populations and lockdown from the very beginning. So all of these kind of things which are very well established now, and of course now we are allowed to talk about perhaps this virus came out of a lab. Yeah, that's in the mainstream. All of these things, you know, we were accused of being conspiracy theorists and put into the Times newspaper and smeared.
I remember at the time. I remember when it came out. There were a few people, you know, who were saying, and you know, on Twitter, and it was the same. It was people I trust who you know, their spidey senses tingle, whatever. Something doesn't add up, and they were starting to say, "Hold on a minute. The U.S. Army was at Wuhan a week or two before this outbreak happened, and then this outbreak happened, and there were some cases beforehand, and then oh well, you know, there were some rumors that." You know, the NIH were funding Wuhan for gain of function research, and we know the whole thing with Fauci, and we've seen, you know, the tete-a-tete with Rand Paul, where Rand Paul's calling him out on it and saying, no, it's not gain of function. We weren't funding gain of function. Everybody in my employ who I pay is saying it's not gain of function. It's like, well, you pay them. They're you pay them not to say that. And then lo and behold, weeks out, the NIH come out and say, no, actually, we were. So you're funding gain of function research at the lab where it's thought COVID originated. And if we spoke about that early on, we would lose our accounts, we would get censured. You, who high profile people, would get smeared in newspapers, you know, but there's no repercussions for that. And everybody was right, it turns out. So this suppression of information, that's why I say it's worrying, because we're not having an honest debate about this at all. Now, I'm not somebody who doesn't think that COVID, who thinks that COVID isn't real. I'm not that sort of person at all. The one thing that convinced me it was a problem was every country at the beginning of this in the world all rang the fire bell, all rang the alarm bell, countries who hate each other. So I took it serious, Piers, but I don't know, you know, I mean, I know you're a doctor of propaganda and not a doctor of health, but I took it serious in that when this happened, if you go back and look at my videos and my podcasts and my live streams at the time, I was like, I've got to sort myself out here. I just quit smoking. So I started looking after my health. I started running. I started really, you know, I work out 4 or 5 times a week now. And I also started taking vitamin D tablets. I changed my diet radically. You know, I did everything I possibly could to keep myself healthy and healthy enough to be able to fight off this virus like it was a, you know, a cold or something like that. But I didn't hear any major network or anything pushing that angle at the beginning of this at all. It was just, oh no, you stay indoors, wash your hands. There was no real health push at all. And for me, that was just really strange. Now, I, on my outlet, my little podcast, I was telling people, get healthy, go running, change your diet, take this opportunity as sort of like, you know, the kick up the arse you need to do all the things that you know you need to be doing. And there wasn't that at all. It was just a very authoritarian, boom, they come down, we've locked you down, and you can't even talk about this. Yeah. And that's scary.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I strongly recommend to all of your viewers and listeners to read Robert Kennedy Jr.'s new book on Fauci, because what Robert Kennedy, I mean, one of the points that he makes is that, you know, about the health response to this, or at least early on in the book, is that lockdown and now the only solution to this is the injection, ignores all of the opportunities for treatment. Yeah, ivermectin, of course, is what people are familiar with, that, and hydrochloroquine, but also sort of other sort of methods and techniques. All of that's being pushed to one side to lock down and then give the injection to everybody. And then the other side to this, which has been completely ignored, is the collateral damage to this. And of course, we see this very, very clearly. And there's an organization called Collateral Global, which is connected to the Great Barrington Declaration, I believe, which documents all of the massive harm being done to people as a consequence, as collateral damage from things such as lockdown. And I think it's a very good book by Toby Green, a British academic, looking at the impact of lockdown on developing countries. And he makes a comment about sort of, we've known for many, many decades, you know, it's an iron law almost of the social science literature, when you increase poverty levels, you increase mortality. Yeah. They go hand in hand. And the impact of lockdown and the impact upon the economy has been hugely destructive on lives, mental health. I mean, and there are lots of very good organizations documenting this. So this idea, and where you're going, that this has not really been about health, is absolutely correct. And Kennedy's book does a good job of documenting that. And, you know, he focuses on Fauci, obviously, but he sort of goes back and looks at the role of Fauci within US public health medicine. And he makes some very powerful and well-evidenced claims that, you know, this guy in his charge, this has been about pharma industry. It's been about getting people onto drugs, which the pharma industry and vaccines and so on, as their solution, which of course they make huge amounts of money from. But, you know, worrying about people's overall health, and not so much.
No.
And I suppose, you know, the comparison is not unreasonable to draw, is, you know, just as the tobacco industry and the alcohol industry are there to get you hooked onto these drugs and then to continue to make money, the pharma industry is in the way it's set up, and the concentration of these companies, they're not there to make people healthy. They're there to make a lot of money from getting you onto something, which you have to take regularly. And well, guess what? This is exactly where we are going with the injection relating to COVID. What were we told originally? 1 shot, you're free, and 2 shots. 3rd shot, Israel, I believe, is now moving on to the 4th shot. Clearly, what they want to do is have everyone taking this injection every 6 months. And of course, they're now trying to roll it out to toddlers.
Okay, there's a few things that, first of all, the whole getting people like having to injection after injection. It's like, oh, don't tell me that pharmaceutical companies won't do this, because there's something called statins that they invented, and if you start taking statins, you can't stop taking them because you'll die, apparently, and at least that's what I heard. So, you know, I see what is it going to be a jab every year? Every 6 months, every year? And why is that the case? Why I don't get why we're 61 people apparently died yesterday, according to the stats in this country, within 28 days of a COVID test. That's not dying of COVID. That's within 28 days of a COVID test. I can almost guarantee you that that figure is going to be much, much higher of within 28 days of people having the flu. And in this country alone. And it seems really, it doesn't seem like I say, it doesn't seem like this is geared towards health. And here's another point I want to make, because if I made a joke, Piers, about the American situation and Joe Biden, because Joe Biden was saying, you know, he wanted people to get the jab. Obviously, they're much more hesitant over in America than they have been over in Europe and elsewhere. But he wanted people to get the jab, and he was saying basically, what more do you want? We give it away for free. And that's the point, isn't it? You gave it away for free. If you really cared about health in America, you wouldn't give it away. The way you work in America is you don't give away things for free. If you really cared about people's health, you would give them a national health service. And, you know, if the vaccine really worked the way you said it'd work, you would charge 10 grand for it. You wouldn't be giving it away for free. And it's kind of like that over here. It's like, well, the collateral damage you speak of there, mental health. This is something I've struggled with massively through all this. I know people in my family that have been devastated by it. I know people whose whole lives were just turned upside down with this. Other people's, you know, their lives weren't affected too much. But there are certain people, older people especially, their whole support networks were taken away from them. Older people can't use technology as much, so they can't connect with people like the way that you and I are doing here. So that's something else that hasn't been looked into. Now, I don't see a massive push here to solve the mental health crisis in the UK. I don't see a massive push here to solve the crisis with the NHS, for instance, with cancer patients who have, you know, the lines are a mile long now because of this. I don't see the government doing anything about, you know, the strains and the stresses that have been put on our NHS. My local hospital in Wolverhampton, I know somebody who works there. And it was a couple of months ago, and COVID we were just out of the last lockdown. So it was sort of probably June time, you know, May, June. And he was saying to me that Monday morning, Doc, after COVID, this is after the wave, was the busiest day their hospital had ever had in its history. And the reason being is the NHS is so crumbling, is so underfunded right now that because of my local hospital sort of being a hub for, I think it's a stroke unit, they send patients from everywhere to it. And obviously society is breaking down. We're becoming extremely unhealthy. The NHS is really underfunded. So if you really cared about people's health in this country, you'd be funding the NHS and solving these problems, but they're not. Actually, what they're trying to do with the health and care bill that they're trying to come through, I think it's the 3rd reading next week, is they're trying to split up the NHS into little packages, so American insurance companies can come in and start making money. And that then all starts fitting into what you're saying. And this is very worrying, especially the fact that if anybody talked about this, we couldn't have this conversation 18 months ago on YouTube. They would have banned us, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I mean, it's important, you know. I mean, sort of, you and I, we're not epidemiologists, doctor scientists who can speak directly to that. But what we can do is we can look at what a lot of scientists are saying, and I also recommend to your viewers to take a look at Robert Malone's interview with Jimmy Dore. And Robert Malone is one of the scientists who was involved in the invention of part of the mRNA technology, which is used in the injection. And you watch that interview, and you know, anybody in their right mind, given who he is and his knowledge, will be thinking, what on earth is going on with any suggestion that the injection should be being given to anyone beyond very high risk categories and so on. But you know, this idea that this is not about health, this is why I think it's very important for us. Whilst it's very good that we have lots of scientists who are arguing against, you know, the specifics of lockdown, injection efficacy, and so on, it's very important for people to understand that this is an event which is being used in order to bring in something else. It's a misdirection in a way. But what is really going on is this drive, this concentration of power, restructuring the economy, which, as you say, is playing out in what you see with what's happening to the NHS, and across all democracies. That's the really big thing that's going on. And of course, you know, as a classic example of propaganda through misdirection, you have everybody focusing on the virus, worrying about it, or arguing over lockdown, no lockdown. The really big things which are going on are occurring out of view of many people, although not everybody now, because a lot of people are waking up to this. But this is, yes, this is not about making people healthy. This is, you know, is very clearly about getting more control over people. It's about, looks like the big corporations and the asset managers, all those elements of global finance, but then the big corporations, big tech, big pharma, securing their wealth, and then getting the rest of us, you and I, whether we are left or right, of left or right political persuasion, but all of the rest of us getting us firmly under the yoke, under control. And it's, of course, it's difficult for a lot of people who've been immersed in this, or we're in a health crisis, and how do we fight this health crisis, to then, as it were, move to this kind of broader awareness that actually there's something really big going on. But as much, you know, I would love it if somebody could give me the evidence to make me change my mind, because I don't like this situation. It's terrifying. Is terrifying what is going on. But this is what's going on. We're losing democracy extremely fast.
Okay.
And we, you know, even again, if we're going to play this game of being generous and bending over backwards, even if you say, well, okay, you can hear what some of these people in the WEF talk about and the need for environmental protection and the need to deal with X, Y, and Z. You can take all of that on board and say, well, okay, but if we're going to confront challenges going into the future with our societies, our economies, with the environment, if we're going to confront those challenges, we need to confront them in a way which is democratic and which involves dialogue and discussion. Because if we don't, you can be rest assured that either whatever ideas they come up with will fail because they haven't been tested to open rational debate, or, which is more likely, and is probably what we're seeing, is that elite groups will simply set up the structures, economic and political, to their advantage. And so when people like Malone or Kennedy or any of these other prominent figures talk about the end of democracy and enlightenment, they're serious and they're accurate as well. This is potentially the end of this period in history where we've had degrees of democracy and freedom. We are looking potentially at that being brought to an end, and a shift into, I mean, again, look at the work of Corey Morningstar on this, or Whitney Webb, a move into this highly digitalized world where there is a huge level of control and surveillance. I mean, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
And that's the future which is being set up for us. And again, for anyone who's sort of thinking, oh gosh, we're getting into crazy conspiracy territories, look at Mark Zuckerberg and look at the metaverse that he was, promoting 2 weeks ago. And you can see where these sort of technocrats and people who have a very, very sort of particular vision of what way the world should be and how people should be. These people are taking us into a very dark dystopian future, and one which is, profoundly destructive to you and I and societies and communities. And just the idea that someone like Zuckerberg can have such little self-reflection to think that people want to strap the goggles on and go into the metaverse, rather than to have fulfilling, meaningful relations with their friends, family, and community around them.
Look, it's beautiful out there. Look.
Well, did you see that spoof by, was it
yes.
Icelandic spoof of, here's Iceland and it's really there.
Fantastic.
This is the kind of awareness that people need to develop, that the people in the West and the people who are trying to package these political and economic changes, their vision for the future is one which is a vision which is possibly shared with fellow geeks such as Bill Gates, but it's not a vision that any of the rest of us want. And there's no other way of describing it. So this idea of a metaverse, for example, this is not good. This is not healthy. I'm all for watching a bit of telly, playing a few computer games and so on here and there, but that kind of transition, and that in the context of again, a surveillance society with digital identity, which has been pushed onto everyone because of an injection mandate justified as this, for the greater good, getting us to central bank digital currency, which can potentially be programmable, that we lose control over our lives and any ability for us to debate and discuss the way we want to live our lives, but also just on an actual day-to-day basis, a profound level of control over people. And I think one example that I think Kennedy gave in an interview was that in China, the facial recognition technology they have can apparently detect looks of guilt on people's face. So you can see, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out where this can lead, and you can see how it's the intentions for how it's to be implemented in China. That kind of society where we're under that level of surveillance, it is absolutely not a free society. And bringing back that sort of 9/11 comparison, after 9/11, as the Snowden leak showed, we moved to a situation with the Patriot Act where bulk surveillance was being carried out routinely. Of course, when governments got found out about it by Snowden, they said, oh, okay, but we'll make it legal now. But of course, it's almost too abstract a point to make this persuasively, say 20 years ago. But when you're in a society where all of your digital communication can potentially be monitored, you could argue that that's democracy kind of like ends then. Yeah. Because you only have to be aware that you're being monitored for you to then start to regulate your own behavior and actions. So that kind of encroachment on the idea of the private space autonomy, which is central to the concept of democracy, started to evaporate at that point, I think. And now with this threat of the surveillance society and the kind of punishment through social credit linked to your money and so on, that's why some people are talking about totalitarianism. Yeah. And also a kind of totalitarianism that we've never seen in history. Never before has there been the technology available to powerful groups, to elite groups, to exercise that level of control over a population. Never before has that been, and now they have that technology. And depressingly, worryingly, but also we should take this as a reason to get mobilized, it's being implemented right before our eyes. So we've got everything to lose and everything to gain, in a way, by standing up to what's going on and trying to bring it to an end, and then trying to have a proper dialogue between communities and between societies around the world as to how we want to live our lives, what we think is necessary for a dignified life, which respects people's rights, which is positive, which is meaningful, which is a bit more meaningful than strapping on the goggles and going into the metaverse, and so on. And so that's everything to lose, everything to gain. We lose, we're into a very, very dark period of time for human history. And a year ago, I would have hesitated, but I think now it's becoming so painfully clear. And we see, I was just in a call with somebody and said that the police in the Netherlands had used rubber bullets, I believe, at the weekend. So you've got mass protests, you've got increasingly coercive authorities. Question would be to some of our friends and comrades on the left, how many warning lights do you need going off before you think we could be in trouble? And I can't think of how many more warning lights do we need flashing before.
The only place I think where I would disagree with anything you've said so far, Piers, is the democracy part about losing democracy. See, I don't think we've got it now. I think it's already gone. I think what you described there with regards to the technology being used and basically reality can almost be augmented if you've got the controls. I play a game. You're talking about the metaverse. I play a game on my computer. It's called Anno. And you basically, you have to build trade routes and you build a civilization. That's basically how you do it. And if you can control information, you can pretty much control the entire democracy. Nobody who was looked at anything coming out of this country's elections in the last 4 years, since 2017, can say that there's anything democratic about it. We know what happened to Jeremy Corbyn in 2017. He was kneecapped by his own party. And, then there's obviously the media against him as well. And then you look at what happened in 2019, and it's like they tore that party from within over the Brexit issue to make sure that what we got was a neoliberal government. And it doesn't matter what we vote for in this country. That's what we're going to get. If you vote liberal Democrat, you're going to get a neoliberal. If you get a conservative liberal Democrat government, you're going to get neoliberal. If you get conservative Labour coalition, if that happened, you're going to get neoliberal. There's no difference. It doesn't affect us on the ground at all. Everything stays the same. Everything's capitalist. Everything's done for the benefit of moneyed interests, and what the people want in this country. It doesn't matter. And we are in a position at the moment, Piers, where technology, we've got it, and the people who are using it right now are sort of bringing in this Orwellian era where everything is going to be looked at and your face is going to be recognized no matter where you go. And we don't have to go that way. We could, Piers, they can calculate and verify 20 million votes on I'm a celebrity, get me out of here in a commercial break. Why can't they set up a voting system where we've got some sort of direct democracy? You could even, you talked about central bank digital currencies here. And I know people are very worried about them, but honestly, I just think this is going to be the future. Digital currencies are the way we're going to go. I'm very unhappy about the central bank part of it, but you can program money now. And if you can program money and you can do things in a certain way, and you could actually get the entire country involved in sorting out the issues that we need to sort out in this country. If you go to people and you ask them, how do you think we should solve this? And you ask everybody, and you get the whole spectrum, you're going to get a good, direction of which to go in. I don't trust one person in this country, but I trust everybody. I'm sure I'm talking about wisdom of the crowd here. I'm sure as a doctor, if you put a load of marbles in a jar and then ask 1,000 people how many marbles. Some people will say 47, and some people will say 47,000. But if you take the average from all of the guesses, it's unnerving how accurate people are at guessing how many marbles in that jar. I mean, they get 1 or 2 when you take the average out. Why can't we implement some sort of that system in our democracy and then reward people with money for getting active and involved in it and saying, I'm going to help to solve this problem, I'm going to do this. And you can actually create a society that's for the betterment of us all then, rather than just the moneyed interests. You mentioned big tech securing health there, Piers. Why haven't big tech, why haven't these pharmaceutical companies said to Africa and India and places around the world, yeah, this is the virus, this is how to make it, go and do it. Why is it that Bill Gates got involved and went, no, we can't do that, we need to hold on to, you're trying to hold on to money. That's your money and power. Yeah. That's what it is. It's not about health, because if it was about health, you'd have given that away to India. Yeah. India would be making the vaccines now. You know, I'm not sure whether they are, but Africa, etc., would as well. And I just think that if you look at the way they're doing things, and then you look at the way things could be done, it's night and day, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you're right. And when I talk about losing democracy, it's not because I'm looking back on our democracies and saying that sort of everything was functioning okay. I do think, however, that this is a clearly identifiable rapid worsening of what was a bad situation. It is interesting, because I do think that elements of the political and economic drivers behind the COVID agenda, as I call it, emanated. You can trace this in some ways to the military-industrial complex in the US. And of course, you know, we have Eisenhower when he stepped down, and he was warning of the loss of control of whatever level of democracy America had at that point, of losing that level of democracy to the military-industrial complex. And then, of course, you know, Kennedy came in, and we know what happened to Kennedy and King and so on. But you can trace a degrading of whatever the level of democracy was at that point. You can trace a degrading of that, a rapid worsening at the point of 9/11, and now with COVID, the potential complete elimination of it. So this is a process which I think is traceable. And then with COVID-19 and the political economic drivers, I think it's the most accurate way of it is of thinking it in terms of the sort of US deep state complex, which Eisenhower warned of, has a significant global dimension to it. And this is where people talk about the globalists, and of course the WEF is tied up with that. Now, these forces are closing down whatever remnants of democracy or whatever minimal democracy we had. But yes, you're correct. And this is actually a point that Kees van der Pijl makes in his book, which is coming out in English now on the COVID issue or the COVID agenda. He says, you know, the technology there is technology which can be used to create a genuinely participatory, democratic, emancipated society, but also global society. These are all things which can be achieved with this technology, if only, as you correctly said, if only you're doing the correct things with it. The problem at the moment is that it's, in a way, it's been, well, not in a way, it has been hijacked by big tech and so on, in the specifics of the internet. And it's been hijacked by powerful economic elites, coalition of elites and groups with shared interests, and they're using it for their own purposes and for their own interests, probably with a bit of window dressing of, oh, we're doing this for the good of greater humanity. But hasn't every dictator in history used that and said, well, we're doing it for the greater good and we're doing it for the right reasons? And so it has been hijacked, and it can be taken back by people, and it can be used to help build societies which are more democratic than we've ever had before, more egalitarian and more valuable in a sense, more fulfilling for people than the kind of societies, as you say, that, you know, people have just been voting, you just get the same, and certainly in Western democracies for a long time. And I guess, however dark the days are that we're going through at the moment, and however scary it is, and however big a fight that we have coming up to try to derail this agenda, I am optimistic that if we're able to derail this, that then it can lead to a point where many, many more people recognize how flawed our systems are. They recognize the kind of corruption of power that led us to the COVID-19 agenda. And that kind of awakening, you know, if we can harness it and if we can build on it, that can be used to create something positive out of what at the moment is starting to look like one of the darkest episodes in history. And that's not, I don't think that's an exaggeration. So, you know, it can be, this can be turned around, and we can use this crisis to build a better world. But, you know, as I'm sure you're aware, because this is what you do with what you're doing, and in a way it's what I do in terms of what I'm doing, people need to understand what's going on and to start to act, to get involved. Plenty of groups, plenty of organizations, but, you know, get themselves informed, start to realize, understand properly what's going on, and have the, you know, confidence and courage to say, right, we need to do something. I need to do what I can to try to stop what's going on. And we are at that point, I think, of you know, mass mobilization, people joining groups, and if we can achieve that, then we've got a fighting chance of derailing this. And then, yeah, using all of this technology, as you said, all of this technology which can be used to much better ends than it has been put up until now. So,
you mentioned dialogue. That's, we need people talking to each other and asking questions rather than flinging shit at each other and calling each other vaxxers and anti-vaxxers and all that sort of stuff. We need dialogue. For instance, what you mentioned, Fauci, and, you know, I think that the guy's as dodgy as a 10-bob note. I really do. I've seen instances where he's lied multiple times on national television and then gone back on what he said a month later and just drove straight through it. Just no rear view mirror at all. And one of the questions that stumped him, and I know Jimmy Dore has, you mentioned Jimmy Dore, he's played, I think it was through one of his shows that I found this out. But one of the questions that stumped him was he was being asked a question by that guy who went on that doctor who went on Joe Rogan and from CNN and
oh yes, I know one of them.
So he asked Fauci while they were doing their talking heads bits on CNN, if you get COVID, you've got a better immunity against COVID than taking the vaccine. So why should people take the vaccine given that the case? And his answer was, I don't have an answer for you on that. That was, well, I mean, there's a serious problem there, Piers, because I'm over 40. I know you wouldn't believe it to look at me, would you? And, you know, I can't believe, I'm sure you're in your 30s too.
I'm only 30. Yeah.
But they're talking about rolling out the boosters now over here. Now, I got the job. I got the jab. I got the second jab, but I had a bad reaction to the second jab. I was knocked off my feet for 3 days. Now they're saying I'm going to have a booster. They're going to roll it out to a booster. It's like, well, I can't. Now you're not talking science and figures and facts. Now you're pushing something on me that I don't want. Now I'm like, yeah, I'm done with you. I'm healthy. You know, where's your drive to get people healthy? You know, isn't it better now that I take my chances? I've had my vaccine, but now it's like, right, okay, well, you can't go anywhere then. You can't go on holiday next year. Well, you can't. It's like, oh, this not about health then, is it? Do you know? So we need more dialogue, and we need more people asking the questions like this. And this is not me being a conspiracy theorist. Personally, I think if you're somebody who goes, oh, conspiracy theorist, I think you're crazy. Because what? You're going to believe everything all governments tell you? They're conspiring against you. They're doing it every day. You know, there are conspiracies that are true. And especially in history, the conspiracies that are true are the ones where you ask questions and they haven't got an answer for you. They can't explain obvious questions away, like, well, is it going to protect me against getting the virus better than actually getting the virus itself. And well, if you can't explain that one away, then we've got a real problem, haven't we?
I'll go back to my recommendation from before. People, all your viewers should get a hold of Robert Kennedy Jr.'s book on Fauci. Don't buy it through Amazon. Get it from a local book supplier if you can.
Yeah, don't get it through Amazon.
And you know, he's documented it, and it's very clear that there is deep problems with Fauci and his involvement in the American, as it were, public health. And it looks uglier and uglier the longer you look at it.
They funded the Wuhan lab to do gain of function.
Well, look. The other point that Kennedy is making is you can go back many years, and you see these simulations for global pandemics and so on occurring, these planning and simulation games. And one of the points he makes is the frequency with which CIA people are in attendance. And he said, well, you know, the CIA don't do public health. They do coup d'etat and so on. And, you know, this is, you know, we're up against some pretty nefarious forces. And I think Fauci is kind of like a figurehead of that. He's not the core of this by any means, but he is a figurehead. And of course, he has been this public figure for the liberals. I mean, I understand that the Guardian newspaper had this article about, you know, he's voted the sexiest man of the year, apparently, you know, as the Guardian doing its normal propaganda stuff, etc. You know, he's been held as a figurehead for the liberal extreme center and their belief in science and so on. And the guy, as you are implying, and as Jimmy Dore has been making a meal out of this, and as Kennedy is making clear, is not a man who we should be trusting, just as Bill Gates is not somebody that anybody in their right mind should be trusting.
No, really
so, you know, but, you know, they are they're the public face of these processes which are underway. And so, you know, it's important that they are revealed for what they are, but it's also important for people to understand that, you know, they represent, and you look at the World Economic Forum and you look at the global leaders, it's extraordinary, the information coming out, the numbers of people in universities and leaders who are now in positions of power who've gone through WEF, the World Economic Forum's system, so to speak. This is a networked, globalized power grab by these groups, and it's not too difficult to see because you know it's not they're conspiring, but it's not, you know, this is not in secret particularly. This is all hiding in plain view. So this can be for people who, this is the thing, right? For people who are willing to take a deep breath and to look at what's going on. It can be seen quite easily. And I think the big trouble we have at the moment is that I think we have a lot of people who have woken up to this, probably at least 20% of populations across Western democracies. But I think we've probably got about 60% of the population who realize something, or they feel in their heart that this is not right. This doesn't make sense anymore, but are too afraid to look under the bed, too afraid to look the bigger picture of what's going on, maybe for fear of what it will, they know what it will tell them, that, yeah, this is something very nefarious, which we're being subjected to. But, you know, people need to be brave, and people need to be courageous and go, right, okay, let's look at what's really going on. And as you said, to talk. So the first step in this is to allow dialogue and allow people to talk. And then people can start to understand what's going on. But it does, you know, there is a kind of a moment where people have to get over this hurdle of realizing that something very bad is going on. And you can almost think, you know, people draw these comparisons repeatedly now, and many Jewish commentators would, that Nazi Germany in the Second World War, that, you know, you had this in Germany. You had the middle classes and the professional classes terrified to really look and to understand what was going on. So they all become complicit, and they just go along hoping it will come to an end. And that's the kind of thing that we need. I think many of us have been standing up and to be counted in all of this. But for those who are standing, who know that something's wrong, there's a moment where you just got to be just a little bit brave, but then also maybe just think, this is about the future of our children and the future of our society, and think, well, now's the time to wake up and stop, and not to just hope that things are going to get better, because at the moment things are clearly not getting better. They're clearly rapidly getting much worse. So, you know, if we don't act now, then we're going to be if they succeed in all of the plans, digital ID, all of these things, and they get everybody locked into those systems, then the resistance will continue, but it will continue in a different form, but it'll be much harder and take a much longer time for the system to be, as it were, taken down. Now's the opportunity to stop this thing in its tracks before it's implemented. So it's really time for people to wake up, talk, realize what's going on, and then see what they can do in order to help all of the many groups and organizations out there who are starting to push back against this. And maybe for all of us, people on the left also, because the left has been criticized for not being vocal enough. I mean, there are some people on the left who are now speaking out about this, but to start to think, well, okay, we need to try to find ways of building alliances with people, you know, across the political spectrum. Let's try to get past the left, right, and try
Thanks for saying that. That's why
I understand that.
That's why I agree with when you said it. I'm done with the whole left, right nonsense. I'm just done with it, Doc, because we've got a situation now where people are like, oh, the radical left in America. It's like, well, who are the radical left in America? Oh, they're Joe Biden and the Democrats. Well, the only way Joe Biden and the Democrats are radical left is that they're center right. That's the only way they're radical, you know? So this whole left-right spectrum, it's got to go. You can't put people into holes like that. You can't pigeonhole them. You can't say, oh, he's questioning the vaccine, so he's on the far right. And that's exactly what they're doing. And guess who is just loving that? The people who were implementing these policies, they want us throwing shit at each other and divided, and that's exactly what they want. They
divide and rule.
People who are uniting against them. They just do not want that. Everything that they do is about creating division. So when it comes to left, right, I try not to look at things like that, because half the people that certainly the media in this country say are on the left, they're not the left, they're centrists at best. You know, the people on the left, they're calling Keir Starmer far left, for crikey.
I believe that Oliver Cam sort of sees himself as being of the left.
Oh my God.
I could be wrong there, but I mean that's my understanding, or I at least know that some people who perceive him to be a voice of the left.
It's meaningless now, isn't it? That it's the left. It's a meaningless term. It's like calling somebody an anti-Semite anymore. Calling somebody on the right. It just doesn't work. You've cheapened the word. You've cheapened it and misused it so much that nobody really knows what's left and right anymore.
Yeah, we must. Yeah, you're absolutely correct, and we must get beyond the tribalism that comes with the left-right divide, and recognise that there is us, humanity, and at the moment we're battling a very small strata number of people. The people, funnily enough, who fly around the world in private jets to environmental conferences,
fighting climate change.
The small one who clearly, as we've seen from all of these images we see of these people putting the masks on, then taking the masks off and partying hard, a group of people who have got no intention whatsoever of submitting themselves to the rules and regulations that they want everyone else to follow. So it's that group versus the rest of us, the human race, humanity, and that's the dividing line now, and not left, right. And that's not to say that there aren't issues between people who see themselves from the left and the right that we need to resolve and so on, and that they're there. But there's a much bigger enemy at the moment, and it's and it's pitted against all of us, whether you're a man or a woman who runs a small corner shop, for example, or somebody who works in a health service. We're all being subject. And then for the professional classes, if they think they're going to escape this. They're not. The professional, they're going to be locked into this system as well. They're not going to be part of that top 1% who get to fly around and have yachts and have their own land and territory and servants and so on. We're all going to be caught in this system, maybe with some sort of privileging kind of thing going on, but not that much. So yeah, it's time to unify. Absolutely. Left, right. Wake up the professional classes. And this is what Mark Crispin-Miller said about COVID-19. He said that this, more than anything, is a failure of the professional classes, the doctors, the nurses, the teachers, the academics, who should have been calling this out much, much earlier on. Of course, some of us have been calling it out, but, it's been an uphill struggle. More are coming on board now. But the doctors and the nurses, the doctors who should have been thinking twice about what they were being asked to do. Professional classes, because of their role in society in terms of, influencing opinion, need to realize what's going on. Because I tell you, in my experience, a lot of the population, a lot of people who I move around in here in Berlin know full well what's going on. You get into a cab, you talk to somebody who works in a local shop, they know that this is not about a virus. And there's lots of us, and these are the people you see out in the streets. So
you mentioned COP26 and them flying around on their private planes fighting climate change. It's a perfect way, I think, to end this and draw the comparison, because one of the tweets I said about that after that whole COP26 event was, this wasn't about climate change. This was about control. This was about them telling everybody else that they are going to have to limit their movements, that they are going to have to limit their holidays abroad, that they are going to have to change their lives, while we are just fine on our private jets flying around everywhere. We don't care about climate change, really. We just care about control. And you could really extrapolate that over to the COVID crisis and say they don't care about health either. They care about control. Dr. Piers Robinson, thank you very much for coming. Is there anything else you would like to say? Is there anything I've missed? What would you like to say at the end?
Now's the time for people to act. Everyone.
Perfect.
Do what they can.
I recommend non-violent civil disobedience.
Absolutely. Not non-violence, but everything. Look at the Black civil rights movement. Look at the suffragettes. There are lots of, it doesn't take long, people looking on the internet to find organizations who are pushing back against this, and many credible people who are pushing back against it, find ways of joining in. But yeah, not non-compliance, civil disobedience, all of those tactics which movements in history have used to affect political change. All of those tools should be, but it requires people to act. Even if they can only do a small amount, it doesn't matter. It just requires people, if only voicing their opinion, if only standing up and saying, well, I think that's wrong. Anything that people feel they're capable of, but now is the time to act. And so, yeah, please do. And
thanks very much.
Dr. We'll stay together.
Where can people find you, Doc?
I have a WordPress site. My WordPress site, Piers Robinson WordPress, and that has sort of talks and so on, and then various other websites I'm connected to, or on Twitter, Facebook.
I'll leave a link below. Thanks.
Put some links in there.
Thanks very much for your time. You're awesome.
Okay.
Thanks very much for watching. If you enjoyed that talk as much as I did, then please give it a like and a share and spread the word. Please support independent media. We really do need your help. Go to my website using the link below to find out ways you can support me for as little. Thanks very much.